Get him out of here. You mean just leave the hotel?
The Shining is a psychological horror film released by Warner Bros. On May 23, 1980. Based on the Stephen King novel of the same name, the screenplay was written by Diane Johnson and Stanley Kubrick, who also directed the film. It stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, and Scatman Crothers. The Shining is one of those films that has found its way into the hearts of moviegoers in much the same way that a tapeworm will fill an empty stomach. Though its style is pretty far-flung from conventional horror movies, it's still considered by many one of the scariest movies ever made, being a defining moment in the careers of both Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson. And at a glance, it's not hard to see why, especially with iconic moments like this. Or this.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Daddy.
And this one too, if you really want to grasp at straws.
Here's Johnny!
So for a movie so impactful on the landscape of not just horror movies, but cinema as a whole, surely this is a viewing experience that's worth losing sleep over, right? In this review, we're booking ourselves for a night at the world's most infamous Airbnb in order to determine if the hype is real or if the recommended viewings page needs to be screened better. Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you still want to see the movie for yourself, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The Shining follows the Torrance family, consisting of Jack, Wendy, and their child, Danny. Jack has recently accepted a job at the Overlook Hotel, where he and his family will live and be responsible for the upkeep of the hotel during the off-season. Danny is shown to be a troubled child, being shy and withdrawn and having an imaginary friend named Tony. Danny has the ability to see and know of events from both the past and the future. Upon moving into the hotel and being given the tour, Danny meets hotel staff member Dick Halloran, who has the same ability that Danny does, which is something he refers to as shining. Dick provides Danny with a stern warning to not go into room 237 no matter the circumstances. The Torrances settle in, with Jack occupying his time with writing while Wendy and Danny spend their days exploring the grounds. During Danny's exploration, he runs into the spirits of two little girls he had a vision of before coming to the hotel. Though frightened by what he sees, Danny is able to convince himself that it isn't real. Danny later finds himself at the door to room 237, which has been unlocked. Sometime later, Danny walks in on Wendy comforting Jack after a nightmare. Wendy notices bruises on Danny's neck, accusing Jack of having given them to him. Angered by the accusations, Jack takes a trip to the hotel bar, where he speaks with the bartender Lloyd about how he once hit his son, claiming it to be an accident. It's at this moment that Wendy shows up distraught, claiming a woman is in room 237 and that she was the one who attacked Danny. The bartender is nowhere to be seen. Though unpleased about the disturbance, Jack goes to investigate and meets the woman in room 237. It is after kissing and embracing her that the beautiful young woman transforms into a bloated, rotting corpse. Jack flees the room, claiming to Wendy that he saw nothing. However, when Wendy suggests that they flee the hotel and get Danny out of there, Jack berates her angrily, storming off to the Overlook's bar, where a ball is taking place. It is at the ball that Jack converses with the spirit of Delbert Grady, a former caretaker who, in 1970, committed suicide in the hotel after murdering his own family. Grady speaks about the abilities of Danny and suggests that Jack correct Danny and Wendy's behavior. Jack disables the radio in the snowcat, preventing any contact with the outside world. Wendy goes to the main hall looking for Jack and encounters him there in the middle of a mental breakdown. He violently lashes out at her, threatening to bash her brains in. Wendy is forced to knock Jack out with a baseball bat, then drag him into the pantry and lock him in. After Wendy leaves, the spirit of Grady returns, telling Jack that he knows what he must do before letting him out of the pantry. Back in the Torrance's room, Wendy is awoken by Danny yelling the word red rum in the middle of a trance. When she looks in the mirror at the bathroom door, she sees red rum, which backwards has spelled murder. It is at that moment that Jack begins to violently break down the door to the room with a fire axe, forcing Wendy to flee to the bathroom with Danny. She sends Danny out of the bathroom window, but can't get out herself. Just as it seems Jack is about to break through into the bathroom, Dick Halloran, who had visions of terrible things taking place at the Overlook, shows up in a snowcat to check up on the Torrances. Dick is violently murdered by Jack, who chases after Danny after hearing his screams. Wendy escapes from the bathroom, running through the hotel in an effort to find Danny, and running into many of the spirits residing in the hotel along the way. After following Danny into the hotel's hedge maze, Jack becomes lost and disoriented after Danny covers up his tracks and doubles back to the hotel. Danny and Wendy reunite, making their escape from the Overlook Hotel in Dick's snowcat, leaving Jack behind to slowly succumb to the cold. The final shot of the movie is a black and white photograph of a 4th of July ball from 1921. Jack is shown to be among the party guests, his spirit now trapped forever within the walls of the Overlook Hotel. Now, before we get too deep into it, it's worth mentioning that there are 2 cuts for this movie. There's the American theatrical cut that is 2 hours and 24 minutes long, and there's the British theatrical cut that is 1 hour and 59 minutes long. I myself watched the British version because that's the copy I had access to, so I can only comment on what I saw in that particular cut. But don't worry too much about it, because there's still more than enough to dig into with that particular House of Horrors. This is not a movie that aims to scare you with big and frightening moments, though it still has enough of those to go around. What this movie goes for is filling you with unease and dread. It takes every minute of its runtime and carefully builds on not only the story, but the atmosphere that comes with it. The final product is something that leaves you uncomfortably anxious and paranoid for 1 hour and 59 minutes, as opposed to being 1.5 hours of filler with 20 minutes committed to turning your pants into a chocolate factory. The feature that perhaps makes this movie as unbearably tense as it is the sound design. You couldn't really call it a soundtrack, but the use of sound in The Shining takes many scenes that would already have you biting your nails, then turns it into an uncomfortable lump in your throat, courtesy of making you bite your nails down to the root. The minimal instrumental, accompanied by high-pitched rings and ghostly cries, introduces nightmare-inducing terror in every single scene, starting slow and then building into an ear-piercing symphony that leaves people wanting nothing more than to throw their TV out the closest window. The camera work works to ratchet up that tension even further. The slow and steady tracking shots, especially in scenes like Jack entering room 237 and Danny encountering the twins, effectively put the audience in the driver's seat of the movie's encounters, leaving them no choice but to sit there and creep towards some unknowable fate. The transitions between scenes and characters in the highlights of the movie work in a way that forces the audience to accept what they are seeing, while still getting the reaction of the characters trying like hell to do the opposite. The set design is jaw-dropping. While it certainly would have been more manageable to create multiple small sets and then use transitions to cut scenes, you can see many of the camera's tracking shots that a lot of the sets are combined together. Because of this, we often get to see characters traveling from one area of the hotel to the next, uninterrupted. This goes a long way in not only showing how large the hotel is, but in developing the movie's lingering feeling of dread, constantly reminding of how isolated the Torrances are from the world, yet that they are also trapped with spectral beings that could be lurking anywhere at any time. One of the most effective tools of this movie is the way it visualizes the ghosts haunting the Overlook. The typical approach to your malevolent being or force in most horror movies is for that being to lurk in the shadows, choosing to strike when the characters are visibly at their most vulnerable, and thus forcing said characters to embark on a quest to learn the thing's origin story and put a stop to them. The Shining, in many ways, does the opposite. The spirits of the Overlook make almost no effort to hide their presence, showing up randomly and without cause. Even though we're given small glimpses into the Overlook's past, they do almost nothing to explain the hotel's sinister nature. Who are the spirits here? What happened to them? The movie's refusal to answer such questions leaves the audience and the Torrances in a state of helplessness, leaving only two options: flee or die. The performances of Jack Nicholson and Danny Lloyd are complete knockouts, and their character progressions complement each other almost perfectly. Danny is a child thrust into a position he did not have a choice in, finding himself trapped both within the horrors of the hotel and of his own mind, showing him of what horrors are to come. His story revolves around innocence and escape, with him escaping the horrors of his so-called gifts through his Tony persona, and shutting out the ghosts that haunt him as being unreal. He does not give in to the hotel's seduction, either mentally or physically, and as such, he's able to break free of its hold and escape. Jack, however, is in this situation by choice. Escaping from the real world to the Overlook, Jack is attempting to create an opportunity to get into writing. It is because of Jack's self-absorbed nature that he answers the calls of the hotel. He goes to great lengths to justify his own twisted nature, and because of his domination of the Torrance family dynamic, he essentially leaves his family to flounder when things begin to deteriorate. Jack's story is in many ways the opposite of Danny, where he allows himself to be consumed by the hotel, unable to separate himself from the ugly truth of who he is and what the hotel is doing to him. And then there's Wendy. It's probably not much of a stretch to say that Wendy is an ineffectual character. While her near constant state of distress lends well to the sinister nature of the hotel, as well as the underlying tones of an abusive relationship with Jack, Shelley Duvall's delivery grates on your nerves rather quickly. It really doesn't help that most of her screen time is also dedicated to scenes where she seems like she's on the verge of literally bawling her eyes out. It's unfortunate because a lot of that can likely come back to Kubrick being a royal asshole to her for the sake of a better performance, but the final product still isn't enough for the audience to find any reason to appreciate her as a character. The first half of the movie also contains an overabundance of some very ham-fisted text-on-black background scene transitions. They are partially effective in helping to show the passage of time early on, and thus develop the feeling of isolation setting in at the Overlook, but the title cards setting up Jack's interview and the move to the hotel only disrupt the flow of the movie, which is a bit of a problem when the beginning of a movie is supposed to capture and maintain your audience's attention. In summary, The Shining is an unforgettable experience. It may not be very faithful to the original novel, and it may not scare you in the typical bear hug with a bladed weapon kind of way, but if you're looking for a movie that fills you with dread, never lets you breathe, and somehow feels a little too real for comfort, this movie is definitely the ticket. But not to worry, there's still a couple of things to nitpick before we wrap this nightmare up in a bow, drop it in a ditch, and then run for our lives. First up is individual room designs. Most of the sets you see for this movie are exactly what you can expect from a grandiose turn-of-the-century monolith, and these rooms are just as breathtaking yet homely as you can expect. But there are a few inescapable exceptions of rooms being art house marker-to-paper Kubrickisms, such as Room 237 and the men's bathroom of the ballroom. These overly colorful spaces are more than a little distracting, and if you ask this uncultured swine's opinion, slightly take away from the tension of scenes with how out of place they feel. The other minor gripe comes from Jack Nicholson's acting. As I said earlier, he absolutely killed his role as a mentally disturbed and overly aggressive father, but there are a couple of quirks, mainly him flicking his tongue around and trying to reach to the moon with his eyebrows, that are just kind of weird, especially in earlier scenes where he's still relatively sane. Doesn't take away from his performance in an unforgivable way, but it's still somewhat distracting to see old Jack popping in and playing himself every once in a while. The final rating for this nightmare that waking up won't save you from is 9 out of 10. It's an emotionally charged powerhouse of a drama film that will still scare you senseless with the fear of the supernatural and the dark side of human nature. If it's any consolation, you'll likely have an easier time getting to sleep after watching this as opposed to most horrors. But if you never try, you'll never know. With that being said, thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed listening to all that uneducated rambling, consider sticking around. Maybe leaving a like and subscribing if you choose. And if you have any recommendations for reviews you want to see in the future, be sure to drop them down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if you care about that, I'll see you when I see you.